Hey everyone, and welcome to RUBIN'S Mind Lab, where we break down the latest research into what it really means. Ever find yourself feeling a bit disconnected from the natural world, always plugged into your phone, or stuck indoors? Well, this new study explores just that, and it gives us a cool way to measure our connection with forests, specifically. Let's dive into a fascinating study that is all about understanding our relationship with forests. The researchers noticed that when we talk about nature exposure, it's often a bit vague, but forests, they offer so many benefits for our health, for our economy, and for our well-being. So they wanted to create better tools, like specific questionnaires. To measure how much time we actually spend in forests and why, they developed two of these questionnaires. One measures how much adults are intentionally spending time in forests right now, and they called it the IFES, the Intentional Forest Exposure Scale. The other one looks back at childhood memories, called the R-IFES. The retrospective intentional forest exposure scale. They were curious about not just how often we go to forests, but also if we're actively engaging, like noticing sounds or feeling restored. Think about it. Sometimes we say, I need some nature, but what does that really mean? Is it a park, a beach, a forest? This study wanted to zero in on forests because there is so much good science showing how beneficial they are. Forests help us physically and mentally, and they provide essential resources and protection. The researchers wanted to create a simple, straightforward way to measure how much people are actually exposed to these environments. So, how did they do it? They gathered almost 100 university students and had them fill out these new questionnaires. These questionnaires were designed to ask about specific activities in forests. For the IFES, they looked at the past 12 months. For the R-IFES, they asked students to remember their childhood, specifically between the ages of 5 and 10 years old, to make sure everyone was thinking about a similar period. They also included other established questionnaires to see how their new scales compared, which is super important for checking if the scales are actually measuring what they're supposed to measure. It is like comparing a new artist's work to that of established masters. Now, for the nitty-gritty of what they found, they used a statistical technique called Exploratory Factor Analysis, or IFA, to look at the structure of their questionnaires. Think of IFA as a way to see if the questions in a survey are all pointing towards the same core idea. For the IFES, all 6 questions fit together really well, suggesting they were all measuring intentional forest exposure. For the R-IFES, which was about childhood memories, 5 of the 6 questions also worked great. However, one question, the one about making special trips or excursions to forested places outside one's everyday environment, didn't quite fit as well. It had a lower score, suggesting it might be measuring something a little different than the other childhood forest experiences. Because they wanted the adult and childhood versions to be structured the same way, they decided to remove that one weaker item from both the IFES and R-IFES. This resulted in 25-item questionnaires. This is a really careful step in research. It shows they're not just blindly accepting all their initial ideas, but refining them based on the data. The results showed that the IFES, the one for adults, seemed to be a pretty good measure. It had moderately positive connections to other measures of feeling connected to nature and feeling restored. This is exactly what you'd expect. If you spend more time intentionally in forests, you are likely to feel more connected to nature. However, the R-IFES, the one for childhood memories, had some interesting quirks. While its internal reliability was good, meaning the questions within the scale were consistent, its connection to other measures, especially the ones about childhood experiences, wasn't as strong as the adult scale. The results also showed a definite ceiling effect for the R-IFES. This means most people who answered the childhood questions tended to give very high scores, indicating they felt they had a lot of forest exposure as kids. This might mean the scale is too easy to score high on, or perhaps people actually did have a lot of forest exposure as children compared to adults. The researchers noted that this ceiling effect for childhood forest exposure has been seen in other studies too, not just in Finland where this study was conducted, but in other countries as well. They speculated that perhaps in the past, kids had fewer entertainment options like smartphones and social media, leading them to spend more time outdoors playing in nature simply out of necessity. So what does this all mean for us? The study suggests that the 5-item IFES is a promising tool for measuring how much adults intentionally expose themselves to forests. This could be really useful for future research looking into things like why people care about nature conservation or how time in forests helps us feel better. For the R-IFES, on the other hand, they think it might need some tweaking. The ceiling effect and slightly weaker validity suggest it might not be as accurate for measuring recalled childhood forest experiences. They even suggest that maybe the response options should be adjusted to allow for even more frequent activities. or that future studies should consider how different timeframes for childhood might affect the results. Now, like any study, this one has its limitations. The researchers were upfront about this. They acknowledged that it was a preliminary study and they plan to do more research with bigger, more diverse groups of people. They also want to check how reliable these scales are over time with test-retest reliability studies. One specific limitation they pointed out was with the very last item in both questionnaires: feel emotionally connected or restored while in forested places. They realized this item tries to capture two different feelings at once: emotional connection and feeling restored, while it reflects how people might actually describe their experiences. They suggest future studies might be better off separating these into two distinct questions. They also mentioned that for testing the R-IFES, the questions they use to check its criterion validity, meaning how well it matches other direct measures of forest exposure, were all about adulthood experiences. This might not be the best way to check the accuracy of a childhood memory scale. Future research could include childhood, specific ways to measure forest exposure directly. And remember how they specified childhood as ages 5 to 10. They admit that this was a choice to create consistency, but it also means participants might have rated things differently if they'd been asked to recall their entire childhood, say up to age 12. So, future studies might want to explore how different definitions of childhood impact those R-IFES scores. Overall, this study has given us two new tools, the IFES and the R-IFES, to measure our relationship with forests. The ISEs seems pretty solid for adults, offering a way to quantify intentional forest exposure and potentially link it to well-being and pro-environmental actions. While the R-IFES needs more work, the findings highlight the potential for widespread positive childhood experiences in nature. What I really like about this research is that it is trying to make the abstract concept of nature exposure much more concrete, especially when it comes to forests. Forests are so vital for our planet and for us. Having better ways to measure our connection to them can help us understand how to foster that connection, which is crucial for both human and planetary well-being. It's a reminder that even small intentional engagements with natural environments can add up to something significant for our mental health. For future research, it would be fascinating to see larger studies using the IFES to predict things like climate policy support, or to explore its role as a non-material need satisfier in a world, increasingly focused on sustainability. And for the R-IFES, perhaps exploring different response scales or memory prompts could help unlock those valuable childhood nature memories more effectively. What do you think about these scales? Do you find yourself spending more time in forests now than you did as a child, or vice versa? Let me know in the comments below. If you found this breakdown helpful, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to RUBIN'S Mind Lab for more science simplified. We'll see you next time.